Thank you for your patience and cooperation. Boarding will begin in a few moments.
Hello YouTube, and welcome! Phriq here, and we have a new flight for you in our Let's Play Flight Simulator X FSPassengers Season 2 video series. In this flight, we're going to be doing a longer flight. That is right, if you remember our last flight from Sherman Denison, Texas to where we are right now, which is Norman, Oklahoma, which is just southeast of Oklahoma City. That was about a 103 nautical mile flight. Well, today, let's quadruple that. That is right, we're going to be going 408 nautical miles, or if you're more familiar to ground miles, aka statute miles, which you use when you're driving a car, it is 470 of those. And that's if you're driving in a straight line. If you're on roads, it's actually going to be longer. Where are we going on this great long journey, you may ask? Well, we're going all the way to Pueblo, Colorado. That is right, KPUB, or KPUB, Pueblo Memorial Airport in Pueblo, Colorado. If you're unfamiliar with the geography of Colorado, Pueblo is just south of Colorado Springs. Well, if you don't know where Colorado Springs is, don't worry, because Colorado Springs is just south of Denver. That's right, all three cities are in a vertical line south to north or north to south, and from the center of Denver to the center of Pueblo, it's only about 80 miles. So they're all pretty close together. So that is where we are heading. Why, you may ask? Well, I have gotten some great suggestions from some of you fine viewers to fly in some great places. One of you suggested that I fly to Aspen, Colorado. Another one suggested that I fly to Devil's Tower. I think those are great ideas, and I think I am gonna do them. But in order to do them, we gotta get to the Rocky Mountains and do some mountain flying. Well, that brings me to my next point, today's Let's Learn topic, and that is gonna be mountain flying. It's gonna be information about what to expect when you are mountain flying, and there are a lot of extra considerations to think about. So, we are gonna talk about that. But we're going to have to wait until we are in the air to have that riveting discussion, so I'm going to again leave you on a cliffhanger. But let's get in the air, and let's get to Pueblo. In order to do that, we got to run through some checklists. We got to get this plane ready for a flight with passengers to Pueblo, Colorado. As always, if you want to follow along in the checklist that I'm using, there is a link to it in the description box below. Also, as always, I'm going to be skipping the pre-flight inspection because so many things on that, because this is a simulator, are not able to be accomplished. So I'm going to go straight in to the startup checklist. So startup checklist, avionics power switch, we want to make sure that that is in the off position, which it is. Beacon and nav lights, we want those on, so on, and I left that one on, so beacon and nav lights are on. Also, you can see that I have removed my yokes. That is so I can look to make sure that my circuit breakers are pushed in. However, they are non-interactable buttons, so if one was pushed out, I couldn't do anything about it because it is a video game. Next, we're going to come down here to our fuel selector valve, and you can see it is on the all selection, or both, meaning that it is drawing fuel from both tanks. Well, this is a glitch with this aircraft because this is only a left or right fuel selector. However, again, like I mentioned in the last episode, I modified it to select fuel from both tanks, so we are going to leave it at that. Next thing we want to look at is the carb heat, which is in the off or cold position. And it is. If you want to learn about carb heat, that was last episode's Let's Learn discussion. So if you missed it, check out episode 2 of season 2, and we had a riveting discussion about carb heat or carburetor heat. So if you want to learn about it, check that out. Next thing we are going to do is we're going to make sure our mixture is in the full rich position. We're also going to crack our throttle about 1/4 of an inch right there. Brakes, we want to make sure that they are on, so we can look at our handle right here and it shows parking brakes are on. Also, parking brakes are showing on down here in this little red notification bar. Next thing we can do is propeller area clear. In order to do that, I'm going to open this door, yell out it, all clear, because I want to make sure that no passerbyers or pedestrians or humans or people or squirrels or dogs or whatever might be in front of the propeller are standing there, because I don't want to chop them up into pieces when I turn on my propeller. Next, we are going to turn on our master switches. That includes our master battery and our alternator switch, and they are now turned on. We'll hear that kind of whine up noise, which means they are coming to life. Fuel pump switch, we are going to turn that into the on position. That is going to act as our engine primer during the startup. Also, if we needed a little boost because maybe it was cold or we haven't started the engine in a while, we do have a hand primer right there that we can use as well to prime the engine. Next thing, let's go and start up this engine. So ignition to the start position. We can see that the propeller is spinning. There was a poof of smoke showing that everything was kind of clearing out that was in there, and it is in the on position. Next, what I'm going to do is turn off my fuel pump. I'm going to also turn on my lights and my dome light down here to make sure that we can actually see some, because I want to be able to see. It's funny how my instrument panel lighting actually makes my instrument panel darker, so I'm not going to use that. Anyway, we can look at all our gauges right here to make sure everything is in the green. The checklist specifically says to look at oil pressure to make sure that is in the green, because if you don't have oil, that is bad. Avionics power switch, now we're going to turn that into the on position, and the avionics come to life. You can see our VOR connected to the first VOR, which is 114.10, which is that Will Rogers VOR that we used in our last flight. Also, the DME is to life, and all our frequencies and radios are up. So that is good. Startup checklist is complete. That means we can go into the pre-taxi and taxi checklist. However, before we do that, I'm going to go into FSPassengers and I'm going to start a flight. So let's start a flight. There are 2 passengers who are ready and willing to fly with us, and I'm going to put those 2 people in the plane, and we're going to look at them. We have the 176-pound Sanford Blackwell and Omar Gallagher, who is 178 pounds. Whatever, they are relatively good weights, we'll take it. Next, we're going to put in 200 pounds of fuel, or luggage again, excuse me, because that is the most that, according to the pilot operating handbook, this aircraft should have in the cargo hold. I am not going to exceed that. Now, if you remember last flight, we only had about 40 pounds of luggage from the passengers and 160 pounds of cabbage because there was a cabbage shortage in Oklahoma City. Well, today there is another shortage. We're only taking 40 pounds of luggage for the passengers, so what are we doing with the other 160 pounds? Well, I just got word that Pueblo, Colorado is having a giant shortage of dun 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 kittens. That is right, they are short on kittens. So what we have in our cargo bay is 160 pounds of kittens. Now, a kitten only weighs about a half pound to a pound, so that means we have well over 160 kittens in our cargo bay of this aircraft. That is ridiculous, but that's what I am pretending today. It would be a really annoying flight because that would be a lot of meowing. I just put 100% fuel into the aircraft and opened up advanced fuel to make sure it's 100% in both tanks, which it is. Set destination. Let's go ahead and enter KPUB, which is Pueblo Memorial Airport in Pueblo, Colorado. Okay, set destination. Thank you, British lady. Set type. And that's going to be a normal flight type because we're going from 1 departure airport to a B arrival airport. Set flight type, and that is set. So we got our type set, we got our destination set. I'm not going to do the flight and aircraft settings. 200 pounds of luggage, 160 of which is kittens. 2 passengers, 1 pilot, 100% fuel, and a partridge in a pear tree. So, okay, real-time load. It's going to take 2 minutes and make sure that we have the door open. Here is the pilot data sheet and load manifest. It is basically the same as it always is. The never exceed speed is 148 knots. We won't exceed that. Then I could calculate my rotate speed and things like that because it does change depending on your weight. However, I am not going to do that. I am just going to assume that it's always relatively within a couple knots, and I'm not too worried about a couple knots, so we're going to rotate at about 75 knots. Start flight, okay. There are 2 passengers coming into the plane right now, so what I'm going to do is go into my avionics panel. I'm going to set my frequencies. So you can see I have 121.6 set. 121.6 is the ground frequency for University of Oklahoma Westheimer Airport. 118.00 is the tower frequency. However, I'm going to change that frequency quick to 119.55, which is going to be the ASOS or ATIS information for this tower. And we're going to listen to the weather.
Oscar, uniform, November, automated weather observation, 1114 Zulu, wind 006 at 7, visibility greater than 20 miles, sky condition clear below 12,000, temperature 26 Celsius, dew point 19 Celsius, altimeter 2999. Oscar, uniform, November.
Alright, so now that we have our weather information, I'm going to tune this back to 118.0, which is going to be that tower frequency. Also, you can see down here it is 120.45, which is approach and departure for Will Rogers, or yeah, I believe it's Will Rogers Airport. So we're going to leave that as is. Next, we're going to turn in our frequencies here. So we have 114.1, which is the VOR for Will Rogers. By the way, this is VOR Navigation, and we're going to be using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 VORs throughout this entire flight. It is going to be a longer flight. So we have 114.1, which is Will Rogers. Next, we're going to be tuning to the Gage VOR, which is going to be 115.6. So 115.6. And then the next one is the Liberal VOR, which is 112.3. So we have our first VORs set. Also, if you remember from our ATIS information, winds are 006 at 7, so pretty much straight out of the north, so we can assume that we're going to be taking off from runway 35. Also, sky is pretty much clear under 12,000 feet, so it should be no factor for us right now. I am going to turn on my fasten seatbelt sign, and I'm going to open, and by open I mean close my door. All passengers are in. Going through the pre-taxi and taxi checklist, I'm going to make sure all my flaps are in the up position, which they are now. Avionics and radios are on, and the frequencies are set. Transponder, we're going to turn that to standby, which is going to be the first notch right there. ATIS and ASOS or AWOS has all been checked. Whoa, I minimized my game accidentally. Sorry about that. Altimeter is set to...
Altimeter.
2909. Let's take a look at that. 2909. That's not really set. 2909 is about right
Altimeter.
there, I'll say. I'm hitting B because that usually sets your barometric pressure, aka altimeter, because I cannot see exactly what it's on. I just want to make sure it's on the right one, and that's why you're hearing that altimeter in the background. The last things on the pre-taxi and taxi checklist are landing and taxi lights. We want to make sure that they are set. Well, I don't have taxi lights, so I'm not going to be doing that. And then we're going to test all our instruments and things like that when we are in our taxi. So what I can do right now is pull up the ATC window, and we are going to contact KOUN ground and request taxi for a departure to the west.
Westheimer ground. Papa Hotel Quebec 28. Ready to taxi. West departure. Papa Hotel Quebec 28. Taxi 2 and hold short of runway 35 via taxiway Alpha Delta Charlie. Contact tower on 118.0 when ready.
Alright, so we are going to acknowledge that. Contacting tower on 118.0, runway 35 via Alpha Delta Charlie.
Papa Hotel Quebec 28.
Alpha, where is Delta? Right there. Alright, so if we pull over our lovely airport diagram, we are somewhere right over here. So what we are going to do, I believe we're like right here. So we're going to pull a UE, come here onto Alpha, go down here to Delta, and then over to Charlie, which will take us to runway 35. So that is our taxi plan. So what we can do now is we can turn off our parking brake, which is this nice little lever right here. Also, you can see it is getting brighter. It is going to be a morning flight, and last flight was a night flight. I figured I'd do a morning flight because we're not going to be doing very many morning or night flights or late evening flights while we're flying through mountains, because it just isn't safe. I don't want to crash into a mountain and die because I can't see it because it's dark. So we're just going to be flying in the day. That is what is recommended during mountainous flight anyway. I'm not sure exactly where I am, so I'm just... Alright, I was right. I'm going to turn that off. I know where I am now. Just wanted to make sure that my taxi stuff was correct. I try not to use progressive taxi because it's not as realistic. However, if I get myself in a bind, I will take a look at it. Whereas in real life, what I'd maybe do is use my airport diagram and GPS or satellite images to see where I am and whatnot. Can't really do that in this game because some of these airports are not as up to date as they are in real life, because this game was created about 10 years ago, so they're not always the most accurate. I believe I have to turn in there, which is right. Perfect. Perfecto. It is hard to see the lines as well because I don't have any taxi light. Now if I turn on my landing light, I'll just get penalized, which doesn't matter because I'll get penalized for not using a taxi light anyway. So either way, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Alright, so we are on taxiway Alpha, and I'm going way too fast, and you can see that it's taxiway Alpha because yellow on black is where you are at. Looks like taxiway Delta is coming up, and we need to turn right to get on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hang a right turn right here. Not that fast. Oh man, that would have been very, very bad if I would have tipped over. Oh, that would have made me embarrassed, and it would have made the customers very mad. And I don't want that to happen. So we are on taxiway Delta, and we are coming up to runway 321, which is that angled airport or runway, which is not being used. But we're gonna stop at the hold short line like I always do. Take a look just to make sure there is no traffic on it, because that is what you are to do. Now there is nothing there, and tower or ground is not going to give us a go ahead and cross that, so we are going to go and cross it ourselves. Here we can see that we are coming up to Charlie. We're on Delta, and here's Charlie, and we can either turn right or left. Well, how do you know which direction you want to go? You have to turn left because we are facing west right now, and we're going to be taking off on a north departure since it's runway 35, which means we need to turn left to get to the south of that airport. That is how you could do it if you did not have a airport diagram. So we're coming to the hold short line, and I am gonna slow down right now, and we can go into our run-up checklist. Sorry about that break there in the video, everybody, but I had to quick tend to my family. But with that said, let's go into the run-up checklist. So brakes are set and holding. Seatbelts and harnesses upright and secure. Cabin doors and windows are closed and latched. Make sure the door is closed because I don't want to drive with that open. Flight controls are free and correct. Primer is in and locked. Fuel selector is on the proper tank, which is both. Fuel pump is off. Next, we can go into our mixture, which is rich or appropriate. We'll learn about that a little more when we're talking about mountain flying, because that's when that or appropriate really starts to take consideration. Elevator trim, we want to set that for takeoff, so we're going to look down here. We're going to make sure our flaps are in the 0%, which they are, and then we are going to check our trim. We don't want it quite at 8, so I'm going to turn it 6.8. Sounds like it will be good. Annunciator panel, we want to make sure nothing's on, which we can see the oil and the vacuum are on. I got to give it a little more power, and then you can see the oil came off, and the vacuum will start to come up off too. Whoops. And that is right there, and we can see that came off once I gave it a little more throttle. Next, what we can do is we can look at our autopilot and air conditioner and check those and make sure they are off. Well, I don't have autopilot, and the air conditioner is off because I don't care about my digital passengers' comfort levels. Also, I'm going to press and test this to make sure the annunciator panels are working, which they are. Next thing we can do then is run up our throttle to about 2,000 RPM, which I'm going to come just shy of that. Normally, again, you would have this done facing into the wind, so I would be facing north. However, it is really hard to do those small turns in the simulator, so I'm just going to keep it facing west as I am right now. We can look at our tachometer and see that we're stable at about 1,812 RPM. And so what we are going to do now is check our first magneto. And we'll see a little bit of a drop, which is about a 50 RPM drop, and that came. So then we'll come back and we'll see that the RPM is slightly increasing again. We'll go to the other magneto, and it's dropping again, which means both magnetos are working, so we're going to bring that back up to the both, and we'll see that it came up. Next, we'll check our carb heat, so I'm going to turn that on, and we see a bigger dip. It's about 150 RPM dip in the RPM because of the carb heat being on, and the carb heat is working. Finally, we can make sure that our vacuum pressure is good, and we can check all our other gauges here to make sure everything is in the green, which it all appears to be so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull back my throttle to about 1,000 RPM again. Flaps, we want to make sure they're set for takeoff, where I'm not going to be using any flaps for this takeoff. With short field takeoff, I would. Pitot heat, I do see some clouds. They're all pretty much above us, but I am going to turn on my pitot heat because I don't want to run into an issue where my pitot static tubes could get full of ice and then I would not know my airspeed. That would be bad. Heading indicator, we want to adjust that to compass. Well, it's pretty much at what the compass was showing. Also, during our taxi, we could see that our turn coordinator and our artificial horizon and our heading indicator, all of those were moving with our motions, so we know that they all worked. Finally, transponder, we're going to turn that to, alt, which is not that one because that's on, but that one because that's alt. So we're going to leave it right there. With that said, our run-up checklist is complete, so we can go into the normal takeoff checklist. So proper runway, check runway heading, which we are on the right one. Traffic, we're going to check for that. Navs and strobes and landing lights, we'll turn those on. So our landing light will come on. I don't have strobes in this aircraft. I don't know why there is no strobes in it. Don't ask me, it doesn't make any sense to me, but we don't have any, so we won't be able to have those on, and we will just get penalized. Flaps and trim are set for takeoff. Carburetor heat is off. Electronic fuel pump, will go ahead and turn that into the on position. Mixture is rich, or unless you're above 5,000 feet, which will be the case when we're in Aspen, it will be leaned. Brakes, we could go ahead and release them, but first we need to tune to Westheimer Airport since we are at the hold short line, and we need to request takeoff clearance VFR from Westheimer Tower.
Papa Hotel, Quebec 28 at runway 35, ready for takeoff. Departure to the west. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, hold short, runway 35. Traffic is Piper Archer on the runway. Piper 834, turn next taxiway.
There's that Piper Archer right there, and you can see, hopefully, that they'll be turning off, which means that we'll be able to take off. Looks like a clone of our plane.
Hotel, Quebec 28, did you hear my last transmission?
Yes, I heard it. Sorry, I forgot to acknowledge it. Always make sure you acknowledge ATC communications, whether it be from tower, ground, or any other controller that you may be in contact with.
834, turn next taxiway.
Piper is just chugging along on that runway. They are going slow. Whoa, what are we doing? Stop that. I just want to look at the plane. Where is he going? Why didn't he turn at H3? Are you going to turn at Charlie 1? Hopefully, because you're pretty much out of runway otherwise. You think you would be able to let me at least taxi on.
834, exit runway when able.
This is kind of ridiculous. That guy is going so slow. Oh, here we go. Thank you for turning, finally. Oh my. That was painful.
Piper 834, contact ground on 121.6. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, cleared for takeoff, runway 35, west departure.
Alright, we are cleared for takeoff. So I'm going to start taxiing onto the active runway.
South, inbound visual, runway 35, approach. American Pacific 7213, Westheimer Tower, make straight in, runway 35, altimeter 29er. Fly straight in, runway 35, American Pacific 7213, cleared for takeoff, runway 35, Papa Hotel, Quebec 28.
Alright, we are cleared for takeoff. Here we go.
121.6, Fort Piper 834.
And you can see we are heading north because we are on runway 35. And we will gain enough speed and then we will take off and eventually turn to the west to head to Pueblo, Colorado. We're at about 70 knots, 75 knots, so I'm going to begin my rotate. And we are off the ground. beautiful. Hopefully nothing bad happens this flight, and it'll be a nice long flight to Pueblo, Colorado. Looking forward to getting there because it is going to be fun flying through the mountains. I am very excited actually to be doing that. So thank you for all the suggestions on where to fly. If you guys have more, please send them to me because I love the interactivity. Also send me any comments or questions or anything like that because again, I like that interactivity. But again, thanks for those suggestions to fly to Aspen, to fly to Devil's Tower. I am looking forward to those. That guy has cleared the land. We are going to start slowly turning to the west. Keep our climb going, and eventually we will be told to contact Oki approach, which is going to be 120.45. Also, we have connected to their VOR, so what I need to do is I need to change this to a heading of 292, which is going to be the radial that we want to be on in order. Oh, and that's going to be to our right, actually. But that is going to be the radial that we want to be on in order to get to the next VOR, which is going to be that Gage VOR. Also, I'm going to pull up Sky Vector. That's Denver. Sorry that you're missing the noise. I just wanted to make sure that this airport here is a Class... Alright, it is not a Class B. I just wanted to make sure of that. "100% satisfaction so far. 2 passengers wearing their seatbelts, which is good because the seatbelt sign is on. Oklahoma City below us, the sunset to our east. How beautiful. Getting a little bumpy, but that is alright.
Office Hotel, Quebec 28. You are leaving my airspace. Frequency change approved.
Alright, perfect. So we can turn to Oki City approach on 120.45. So what I'm going to do is, we just are having some weird wind gusts right now. Look at that. What is going on? That's ridiculous. Anyway, I'm going to turn to COM2, which is on Oki City approach, and I'm going to request Class C airspace transition.
Oki City approach. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28 is type hybrid.
Because there you can see Will Rogers Airport ahead of us.
Oscar Kilo 3, 2,900. Request clearance to transition Charlie airspace. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, Oak City approach. Squawk 7656. Mall 02 Whiskey. Traffic is 12 o'clock. 4 miles at 8,500. Mall M7. Report them in sight.
7656. Also, I'm going to turn that to on, so we should be acknowledging the right squawk code right now.
Report them in sight. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28. Radar contact 4 miles southwest of 2. Oscar Kilo 3, 3,100. Cleared through the Charlie airspace. Maintain own navigation.
Alright, and we can maintain our own navigation. So what I am going to do is I am going to be turning towards the right side. Because I don't want to overfly directly Will Rogers Airport. That would just be not nice of me. So I'm going to be turning more towards the north and kind of wrap my way around that.
Traffic alert, 11 o'clock,
Oops.
less than 1 mile, 2,500. Mall M7. Report them in sight. Cleared to the Charlie airspace. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28. Contact Oak City. Approach on 124.6.
124.6.
124.6. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28.
And we'll contact them. Oh, 124.
Orbit 2502. Contact Okie City.
Stop.
Approach on 120.45. Okie City. Approach. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28. With you. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28. Okie City. Approach. Roger. Altimeter 3000.
3000.
Hotel, Quebec 28. Traffic is 11 o'clock. 4 miles at 2,200. Cessna Skyhawk. Report them in sight.
Oh, where are they?
Cessna 905 Charlie. Contact Fort Worth Center on 132.2.
I do not see them.
Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, have the traffic. Cessna 57 Whiskey.
Sorry, I'm kind of quiet right now, but there's a lot of radio communications going on. I've been trying to contact Tower and maintain good communication with them. You can see Will Rogers Airport right there, which is a relatively bigger airport. It is kind of the main Oklahoma, well, it is the main Oklahoma City airport. We took off from KOUN, which is that University of Oklahoma Westheimer Airport, which is actually a relief airport of this Will Rogers Airport. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going north right now because I don't want to directly overfly that, even though if I were to, this is the angle to do it, would be basically perpendicular to these main runways. That is because traffic coming into land or up for the takeoff will be at the lowest point in the middle of these runways. So if I wanted to, that is where...
Traffic alert, 5 o'clock, less than 1 mile, 2,200. Cessna Skyhawk, report them in sight.
2,200, less than...
Cessna 80 Yankee. Contact at the city center on 1.
They're going to be right below us.
Turn left heading 075.
I do not have them in sight.
Soar 7030. Soar 7030. Contact Fort Worth Center on 132.2. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28. Don't have the Cessna, have the Skyhawk in sight.
Oh, he's right there. I see him now.
Soar 7030.
He was way below me. I don't know what we were worried about.
Papa Hotel, Quebec 28. Traffic in sight.
Alright, we are still going parallel to Will Rogers Airport flying north. Again, as I was mentioning, this is where you would cross if you wanted to. It would be perpendicular because the approach and departure traffic would again be at its lowest point right there. Also, if there were aircraft in the traffic pattern, they should only be 1,000 feet above the surface, so we should still be able to overfly them. So that would be a good place to overfly. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going north of Oklahoma City before I actually turn right. I want to make sure I'm just avoiding deconfliction or a confliction with that airport, and I want to get far enough away before I start turning west. That is my own navigation that I am doing. They said I could do own navigation, which technically means I could go direct if I wanted to, but I'm trying to be a little nicer than what they are telling me to do. Also, while we are still climbing, I'm going to bring over my Internet Explorer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to airports in AirNav, and I'm going to type in KPUB, get airport information. I better not have that full screen because I need to be able to see what's going on. And this is the information for Pueblo, Colorado. So you can see Pueblo Memorial Airport in Pueblo, Colorado. What I was wanting to look at was the elevation. And the elevation of that airport is lower than Denver, but it is still 4,700 feet. So we can see right now we are at 4,500 feet, which means if I were to head directly to Colorado, I would run into the ground right now before I'd actually make it to that airport, because I am below the elevation still of that airport. Even though I am this high above the ground, the elevation of the ground is actually going to get higher as we head that way. So to make sure that we don't crash into the ground, we are going to climb relatively high for this flight. What I'm thinking I'm going to be doing is, because we're heading west, we're going to be doing a flight where we're going to be using an even number, such as like 4,000 or 6,000, plus 500. I think what I want to climb to, or what I'm going to try to climb to, is 8,500 feet. So it is going to be one of our higher climbs or higher cruise levels that we've done before, but that is going to be good practice because from Pueblo to go to Aspen is at about 9,000 feet. Plus, the pass that I have to cross is 11,000 feet, which means we're going to have to try to push this aircraft to the limits and get it to about 12,500, if not 13,000, which is right at the edge of this aircraft's ceiling, service ceiling, which is the highest that it is able to do. It is a non-turbocharged engine. It's just a single prop, and because you lose density altitude as you get higher, the air is thinner, thus the engine doesn't perform as well because your propeller is technically an airfoil, and if there's less air to push, it doesn't run as efficiently. Also, your wings produce less lift because there is less dense air there. So that is what we have to look into. So we are pretty good distance away from Will Rogers Airport. I'm gonna look out the window. Let's just, I've never been to Oklahoma City, I don't believe. So we're just gonna kind of do a spinaroo. See if we can't see any fun sights in Oklahoma City. I'm unfamiliar with the city. I'm not sure if there is big towering buildings or anything like that, or if there is, looks like there's maybe a little bit of a downtown right there. Probably not that biggest of skylines. Again, I don't know how big Oklahoma City is. I've never really been there, so it's kind of fun to take a look at it as we're flying, albeit it is a video game. We are climbing way too slow. I'm not happy with this climb rate, so let's try to increase that. Also, we can see that we have connected to the next VOR that we want to connect to. So what I can do is I can try to get myself heading straight towards that, so I'm rotating the VOR selector knob, and in order to get to it, we basically need to fly a heading of about 265, it's looking like. So I'm far enough away from Will Rogers Airport where I am going to start turning towards that radial, which is that 265 radial. So right now we're at about 310, crossing 300.
Okie City approach. Cessna November.
And by 265, I mean 275. Excuse me. That is on the other side of the west. West is directly west is 270. So I'm actually supposed to be going like 285. So we'll turn right again a little bit. That was a poor mistake on my part.
Contact Okie City approach on 120.45.
Looks like we are still completely above all of the clouds, or below all of the clouds. They're all above us. We can see downtown Oklahoma City right there. A few Cessnas flying quite low.
At 5,000 and 500. Hybrids report them in sight. Okie City approach, Cessna November 2006, Mike, this type Cessna Skyhawk 2 miles north of 2.
Alright, we're pretty much on a good heading right now. We're going to keep climbing. Also, if you can notice, my mixture is not full up. If I were to push it full up, I've actually leaned it, but you can see that my RPM drops, which means I need to lean my mixture, and I got to report these guys in sight.
Cessna 06 Mike, radar contact 3 miles north of 2 Delta Tango 2,500, altimeter 3000. Copy, Cessna 06 Mike. Global freeway 542, traffic in sight. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, have the traffic. Okie City approach, Cessna
Just making sure that we're not going to be
2006
crashing
Mike,
into anybody.
Cessna Skyhawk 3 miles north of 2
Times like this, when we have a really long flight, this is where I wish that I had a autopilot, because instead of hand flying all of this, it would be really nice to be able to just manually hit autopilot and let the aircraft do what it needs to do.
Radar contact 4 miles north of 2 Delta Tango 3,100, cleared through the Charlie airspace.
We are slowing down a little more than I would like to,
Cessna
so
06 Mike.
our rate of climb will not be as good as I want it right now.
Okie City approach, Cessna November 2006 Mike, this type Cessna Skyhawk 4 miles north of 2 Delta Tango.
I'm going to quick pull
3,300.
over Sky Vector, which is going to be our aeronautical chart. And we are here in Oklahoma City. You can see the elevation is relatively low, but here is where it starts to get higher. And we're going to find Pueblo, Colorado, which is right here. As you can see, Pueblo, Colorado has some higher elevations around it. As we get closer, there are some peaks at around 6,000 and higher elevation points like that. Especially up here by Colorado Springs, you can see that there's some things that get up to about 12,700. And again, as I mentioned, all these cities are in a straight line. So up here is Denver, here is Colorado Springs, and here, right here is Pueblo. Which is where we are heading. But you can see right by it, there is something at 8,300 feet. Another thing at 5,800. These are the MSAs, minimum safe altitudes, which is going to be basically the highest point. So you want to try to overfly those. And that is why I'm climbing up to 8,500 instead of doing just 6,500, because I'm looking and there are some things relatively in the path that are about at 6,500. Plus, if I only cruise at 6,500, I'm only going to be above the ground by about 1,000 feet. So I want to make sure I'm well above the ground. So that is why I am going up to 8,500 feet. We are still heading towards that other VOR. The next thing I can do is I can switch to 112.3, which is going to be that Liberal VOR, and I've already connected to that as well, which is kind of awesome. So that must have a really good range. So I'm actually going to fly towards that, which we can see is pretty much in line with that Gage VOR. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually... I think I'm going to skip that Gage VOR, but what I'm going to do again now, more flight planning stuff here, is I'm going to bring over SkyVector again, because I want to make sure... Where is this? Okay, that's where we are. Norman Westheimer. That Gage VOR is right up here. But I want to make sure what I'm going to do is, you can see that up here will take you to the next one too, but I just wanted to make sure there were no MOAs in there, which I am not seeing any, so I can fly direct to that other VOR, which is at a heading of almost 290. So I'm going a little north of that, so I'm going to turn slightly to the west. Try to get on a 290 heading, and that should take us the proper distance, or the proper heading, excuse me, to that Liberal VOR. With that, what I can do then is change this 115.6, which was Gage, and we're going to change that to 116.9, which is going to be another VOR that we're going to be connecting to, the Lamar VOR.
City approach, Mall, November 2207 Hotel with you. Mall, November
leveling out at about 2900.
Roger, altimeter 30.
So you can see that we are too far to connect to the Lamar VOR, but we are close enough to connect to that Liberal VOR. Also, if I look at it, we can see that we're 182 nautical miles away from it.
Traffic is 3 o'clock, 4 miles at Niners House. Hamlet -8, report them in sight. American Pacific 5536, traffic is 1 o'clock,
There they are.
4 miles at 6,700. Hyper, report them in sight. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, traffic in sight. American Pacific 5536, traffic in sight. Okie City departure, Hyper, November 14.
I had to lean my mixture back a little more. You can see how low it is. According to my throttle quadrant here that has my mixture, it is lower than 50%. It's actually at about 40% right now. So I am leaning it relatively decently right now, and that is to maintain that high full power
Turn right, heading 060,
in my RPM.
3000. Turn right, heading 060, descend and maintain 3000. American Pacific 13.
We will keep climbing. We can see that it's about 650 right now, so we've been in the air, what, 20 minutes maybe? Maybe not quite that long, but for a little while. Pretty soon we will be directed to contact Fort Worth Center, I believe is the controller of this area, until we get closer to Pueblo, which I believe then Denver takes over as your center that you would be in contact with for all your monitoring of your flight. Another thing you can notice is that our vertical speed indicator is showing not as severe.
Traffic is 4 o'clock, 4 miles at 3,000. 500. Hyper Archer, report them in sight.
Why do I care about them if they're that low below us?
Traffic is 9 o'clock, 4 miles at 5,100.
4 o'clock.
737, report them in sight. American Pacific
There they are,
5536,
down there.
have Boeing 737 in sight.
I saw a flash of red. I know they're down there.
Papa,
They are
Hotel,
way
Quebec
below us,
28,
so I'm not sure why they're calling them out. But whatever. Thank you for that. Anyway, as I was saying before, I had to check for traffic. My vertical speed indicator is not as drastic as it was when I was lower. Again, that is because as I get higher, the air is less dense, so that means my airfoils, such as my propeller and my wings, aren't going to function as efficiently. So I don't get as much lift out of that. Also, I don't have as much power up here because, again, there's less air to pull with the propeller. So in order to maintain that climb rate, I can't be going as quickly and it's not as severe. If I were to get a higher climb rate, I would lose some of my airspeed. And right now, I don't care about my climb rate because I don't have to climb over anything right now. So I'd rather do a shallower climb with higher airspeed, which will get me to Pueblo, Colorado faster. I could change to a best rate of climb, however that means my speed is going to be slower, where I could get up to that altitude faster, but I'm not going to be traveling as fast along the ground, and again, I'd rather travel on the ground quicker, so that is why we are climbing at such a shallow rate right now. Have about another 1,000 feet to climb, and then we will be able to level out and continue our flight all the way to Pueblo, Colorado.
120.45, American Pacific 5536.
Playing with my mixture some right now and just looking at my tachometer to make sure I can keep it at its highest ability. Also, I'm going to turn off my fuel pump. I don't need that anymore. I'm out of my initial climb out for the most part. Landing lights, rotating beacon, we're going to keep all those on. Pitot heat switch, we're going to keep that on. Instrument light panel is off, and also I believe my dome light is on, so I can go ahead and turn that off as well. I don't need that since the sun is up. All my other engine instruments are looking good, so I am happy with how this flight is going.
Traffic is 1 o'clock, 4 miles at 5,500. Cessna Caravan, report them in sight. American Pacific 13, traffic alert, 4 o'clock, less than 1 mile, 4,500. Hyper Archer, report them in sight.
You can see as I get higher, also, that my climb is going to be a lot more difficult. This is going to be a consideration when I am doing my mountain flying, because when I take off, if I have mountains in front of me and I want to overfly them or something like that, I am not going to be able to do it the same as I would if I was a lot lower. So, it's good practice working at these higher altitudes before you fly into mountains to make sure that you understand your aircraft's limitations and things like that.
Mall 07 Hotel. Traffic is 10 o'clock, 3 miles at 4,500. Cessna Skyhawk.
Just doing a check of the weather right now. There are some clouds to the north, but we are deconflicted with them. They might be at our altitude with us. But again, we're deconflicted. Other than that, there are some really high stratus clouds up there, which I am not worried about.
Hotel Quebec 28. Traffic is 8 o'clock, 4 miles at 8,500. Mall M7. Report them in sight. Mall 9 Port Duluth.
8 o'clock.
12 o'clock, 4 miles at 7,000.
Be relatively off our right wing, or left wing, excuse me. There they are.
7 free. Traffic is 10 o'clock, 2 miles at 4,400. Cessna Skyhawk, report them in sight. Papa Hotel Quebec 28, have it Mall M7 in sight.
Alright, traffic is in sight. We're still climbing. We only have 500 feet left in our climb, and then we will be able to level out.
773, have the traffic.
So we'll quick finish this climb, and then what I am going to do is I am going to cut the video because we are not going to, we are going to be doing a lot of cruising, so we'll cut it out.
American Pacific 13. Okie City approach. Mall,
Try to get
November
those
7,
last
373
400
Romeo,
feet
wind
really quickly.
4,500. Mall, November 7373 Romeo, Okie City approach. Roger. Altimeter 3000.
Alright, we have another 300 feet and then we will be done with our climb. I'll level out the plane because I'm sure you're probably getting bored of watching just climbing going on right now. A very slow climb at that. But you can see our airspeed has decreased significantly. So what I want to do is I want to get a little higher. And start to level out and we'll get a little quicker ground speed, or airspeed going as well. Technically I could have cruised probably at like 4,500 until I got closer to Pueblo where I could have done my climb, but whatever, we'll just get to 8,500 and then level out and be happy with that. You can see that we're only 200 feet away now. I also keep on drifting to the west. I must have a north wind, which was out of the north. That's right, it was 006 at 7. Whoa! Just happened there.
2,900. Orbit 2241. Okie City approach. Roger. Altimeter 2999.
I hate those gusts that just significantally change the direction of your aircraft. It's one of the problems with some of these weather engines is they change whenever you connect to a new station, it changes the weather so drastically instead of calmly working your way into it.
Orbit 2241. Turn left heading 120.
Alright, we are getting close to our altitude. About another 100 feet to go. Let's go, let's go. Chug-a-lug-a-lug.
Cessna 901. Traffic is 10 o'clock. 4 miles at 4,500. Hybrid
Alright.
Report them at sight. Orbit 2241. Turn left heading 085.
I'm going to start dipping down my nose and gaining some airspeed, and this will start to level us out. I'm also going to be trimming my aircraft at the same time. Trim. 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 Alright, as you can see, we're pretty close to the altitude that we want to be at, and we are getting relatively level. So what I am going to do now is I am going to pause the video, and I will bring you back in a little bit, but you can see it is going to be a long flight, so obviously I'm not going to show the whole thing. We still have another 167 nautical miles to go before we even get to our Lamar VOR, so we got a little ways to go. So what I am going to do is I'm going to cut this video and I will bring you back later, and when I bring you back, let's talk a little about mountain flying. How does that sound? So I will see you guys all in just a little bit. I am back, you guys. So I missed something when doing my flight planning, but there was a MOA. So if I come down here and look at my GPS, you can see these red lines. These are indicating that there is a MOA. I have looked on my aeronautical chart, which I'll show you in just a second, but they are the Vance 1C and Vance 1B MOAs, or military operating areas. While you can fly through them VFR, I choose not to do that. So what I'm actually doing is, I can't believe I climbed all the way up to 8,500 feet and now am descending, but I am going to actually descend to 6,500 feet because the floor altitudes for those two MOAs are 7,000 feet and 8,000 feet. So if I go to 6,500, I will be below them, and then I can fly direct. Again, this is something that you can fly through if you're VFR. You have to get clearance to fly through it if you're IFR. However, with that said, I always try to avoid these because military training pilots do not want to look for civilian aircraft while they're in their training. They want to try to just focus on their training. So out of respect for the military and their pilots, I am going to decrease low enough.
Leaving my airspace. Radar service terminated. Squawk 1200. Frequency change approved. Squawk 1200. Frequency change approved. Papa Hotel Quebec 28.
Alright, so Vance Approach is apparently who we need to contact right now. I'm not sure why there's not a controller.
Approach on 120.525.
So 120.525. Still descending. I turned my seatbelt sign back on. I had it off for a second, but then I was doing my flight navigation to realize that I was in a MOA, or about to head into one. So that is why I'm going straight west right now, not going directly to where my VOR wants me to go, because I'm trying to mitigate going into this MOA. Until we get a little bit lower. I'm gonna tune to that 1525. And we're going to request a flight following.
Advance approach. Papa Hotel Quebec 28 is type Hyper 11 miles northeast of 2 Oscar 8. Request flight following. Papa Hotel Quebec 28 advance approach. Squawk 6503.
6503.
Hotel Quebec 28, radar contact 11 miles north of 2 Oscar 8, 7,200, altimeter 3002.
3002. Knowledge radar contact.
Papa Hotel Quebec 28.
Alright, and I am lowering below 7,000, so I'm going to go now heading into those MOAs, and I will finish my descent to 6,500 in just a second. And now you can see that we are going to be heading straight into that MOA pretty much, but we should be below it. And once I level off at 6,500, I will show you how I got that information. To avoid the MOA. I actually didn't realize it was there. I'd been looking at the VFR. I even showed you the sky vector and said, oh, there's no MOA. Well, I missed it. That was, it's actually a relatively large MOA, so I wasn't looking at the borders. You don't know you're in a MOA, or you don't see the MOA unless you see the borders. And since it's a digital copy of sky vector of an aeronautical chart, if they're off your screen, you don't really notice it, which is kind of unfortunate. I'm gonna start speeding up now, and that's gonna gain us some airspeed, and then we're gonna start to level off at 6,500. I gave myself some power, and we're increasing our airspeed, and I'm going to pull up the nose summit and start to level off. Keep on getting these wind gusts, which are driving me nuts actually right now. Actually just driving me absolutely nuts. And as you can see, we are pretty much leveling off at 6,500, and we are entering into that MOA. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring over sky vector, and you can see that I pulled up the chart for Oklahoma. Where we were, that's Dallas, and up here is Oklahoma City. We took off from Norman, and we started heading basically this direction. Now, what I missed seeing were these Vance MOAs, which are right here. And in order to find out the altitudes, you can see this is Vance 1C, this is Vance 1 Alpha, Vance 1 Charlie, and Vance 1 Bravo is here. I had to look at a different aeronautical chart to see that. But then I realized that they were exactly in my flight path. So if I go to the world, well, before I go to the world, I got to show you how I knew the altitudes for them. So if you come to your aeronautical chart and scroll all the way to the bottom left, you will see the MOA information right here. So you can see that we were in Vance 1 Alpha, Vance 1 Charlie, and Vance 1 Bravo. You can see that there are hours when they are in operation, 1 hour before sunrise and 1 hour after sunset, Monday through Friday. Well, it is a Monday and it is during the day, so those things are in operation. Now, if I were flying IFR, the controlling agencies to contact are Kansas City Center on these frequencies. This is also if you're flying VFR too, because you want to make sure that you're deconflicted with any of the aircraft. Now, the main thing to look at is right here, this altitude. These are the floors of the MOAs. So all altitudes indicate floor of the MOA. All MOAs extend to, but do not include, flight level 180. So this is the floor of the MOA, and it goes up to flight level 180. And it's showing that for these Vance MOAs, it's either 8,000 feet or 7,000 feet. So to stay deconflicted, what I have chosen to do is descend to 6,500 because that'll keep me below the floors of those MOAs to where I am deconflicting with those MOAs. So technically, again, you can fly in them VFR without permission, but you have to be watching out for those pilots. Now, if there are fast-moving jets in there, it is going to be tough for them flying at, say, 400 or 500 knots to see a small Piper aircraft like myself flying at 100 knots. It's going to be tough for them to deconflict. So, being that I have enough fuel, being that I want to avoid confliction with those MOAs, that is why I descended. Again, like I said, I could fly through it, but I prefer to deconflict myself as much as possible with MOAs when I have the chance. And it didn't hurt me that much to descend 2,000 feet. Yes, I burned a little gas going up to 8,500 and then descending again. I did burn more gas than I would have needed to. Had I seen it, I would have just gone straight to 6,500, stayed there until I passed the MOA and then climbed up. But, again, I never saw it, but that's why you always actively monitor your flight path and where you are going. That is part of your responsibility as a pilot to make sure that you're deconflicting with things such as MOAs and other restricted airspaces like that. So that is why we have, I suppose I can bring back our sound again, why I have descended to 6,500. And that is how you can find out where the floor of the MOA is, the times of its use, and who the controlling agencies are. And we can see that we are flying straight into it now, and we will actually be in it for quite a while. We're going to basically go along this whole bottom corner of it. So we're going to have to stay at 6,500 feet for a while. I kind of wish I would have noticed that so I didn't burn the extra gas, but that is all right. Anyway, looking out the windows, there's nothing of too much interest to see. It's kind of boring out there. There's just a lot of farmland, some trees, and just kind of prairie-looking land. Not the most interesting of sights right now, but you can see I am level at 6,500, and we are cruising at a relatively nice clip. So what I am going to do is I am going to pause the video again now that we are below that MOA and we are deconflicted with it. I'm going to keep on flying towards that Lamar VOR, which is that that fourth VOR. After the Lamar VOR, it's actually the Pueblo VOR, which is 116.9. Whoa, I am wrong on that. 116.9 is the Lamar that we're not to. We're connected to the Liberal. We're skipping the Gage. Excuse me, we're following this. So we are connected to 112.3, which is a Liberal VOR. So I gotta make sure I'm looking at VOR indicator 1. Because we have not yet connected to the Lamar VOR, which is 116.9. Anyway, I'm going to keep flying here. I'm going to pause the video, and I will bring you back in a little while. And when I bring you back, we will talk about mountain flight. Hello YouTube, I am back. As you can see, we are slightly higher than our 6,500 foot mark. However, looking down at the GPS, we are just about to cross out of the MOA, which means we can climb back to 8,500 feet, which is the altitude that we were hoping to cruise at in the first place. So, what I am going to do is I am going to start my climb, because we are now out of that MOA. So I'm going to do a slight climb, and it's not going to be a very drastic climb. I don't want to burn a ton of extra fuel by really pressing it and climbing super fast, so I'm going to do a gradual climb. But it's going to be a climb nonetheless, and we are going to try to get to 8,500 feet again, since we are finally out of that MOA. As you can see, to that Liberal VOR, which is our second VOR that we're connecting to outside of Will Rogers. We went from Will Rogers to Gage, which we were to overpass pretty quickly and connect to Liberal, which is 112.3. You can see that we are still 65 nautical miles away from it. However, you can also see that VOR2 indicator has also come on. If I go over to my DME and switch to the second one, we're 172 miles away. That actually came on about 30 miles ago, maybe 25. It was around 190 to 200 miles away from that VOR, and that's the Lamar VOR. Liberal actually is about halfway point to Pueblo from Oklahoma City, so we're about 64 miles to the halfway point, and then we'll connect to, or fly to Lamar, and then into Pueblo. Lamar to Pueblo isn't that far. However, we are still climbing. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to tune, or not really tune, but change my Omni bearing selector knob to where we find the heading to that Lamar VOR, which is basically the same as that Liberal VOR. So with that Liberal VOR, we no longer need that anymore, since I have double-checked this time. There are no MOAs in between those, so we can climb and we can fly direct to that Lamar VOR. So what I am going to do is I am going to tune up here to the Pueblo VOR, 116.7. So 116.7. And that will connect us, hopefully, eventually. Wow, it might have already connected us to... It connected us to one that is close. Oh, I never... Dumb. I gotta change that to the active. But it actually did connect us to the Pueblo VOR, and we are turning. Stop doing that, aircraft.
November 963.
109 nautical miles. I don't believe it is the south.
Roger.
So connected to another VOR, you can see that it's wanting us to head east because it's showing a 2 flag, and we're not going to be heading east, so it's connected to a wrong VOR right now. There must be a one that is 190 miles to the east of us that it is connected to, so we're not going to buy that. So what I am going to do is I'm going to keep this on the west, like this, and we're going to fly straight to this Lamar VOR, which is 116.9 and is a good solid 168 nautical miles away. This is and has been a long flight. You can see now we are clearly out of that MOA, and we're at about 1,000 feet below our desired altitude. I come over here, and I'm just going to zoom out a lot. We were way down here, we're going way up here, so you can see that we still have a long way to go. but we're getting close to the halfway point. Still got a ways to go. With that said, this sounds like a great time. Why did my aircraft dip like that? I don't know what's going on. Anyway, this sounds like a great time while we're finishing out our climb to talk about mountain flying, because that is going to be our Let's Learn topic for today. Since we are going to Pueblo, Pueblo is just on the edge of all the Colorado Rocky Mountains. We are going to be heading into those. We should learn about mountain flying. So that is why I'm going to talk about mountain flying. So mountain flying can be a highly rewarding yet extremely unforgiving experience. While it opens up the opportunity to fly to unique and scenic locations, the challenges associated with it should never be taken lightly or overlooked. There are many factors of flying that have to be considered before you attempt any mountain flying, basically. There are often unique, these factors, I should say, are often unique to the mountain flying experience, and thus the average aviator may fail to recognize them without proper preparation and planning. Because of this, the FAA highly encourages, though does not require, any pilot who aims to attempt mountain flying to first complete a mountain flying training course from a recognized training program. Additionally, it is also recommended that any pilot attempting a mountain flying or attending a mountain flying course have at least 150 hours of flight time as pilot in command to ensure that they have the sufficient skills and abilities to take on such a challenging flying experience. With that information, excuse me, I can't talk today, holy cow, but with that information prefaced, we're going to be flying in a simulator. However, the information that I am about to relay is real-world information that is only intended to make your FSX experience more realistic. Please don't assume, and I can't stretch this enough, please don't assume that because you accomplish something in Flight Simulator X, that you think you can do it in real life. The simulation is a lot more forgiving, for the most part, than real life. So again, we're going to be talking about mountain flying. Please don't just try it in the simulator if you have your PPL, private pilot license that is, and just assume, well, I did it in the sim, I'm going to do it in real life. You should always get the proper training so you know exactly what to expect and what to do, because flying in a simulator is different from real life. With that said, the first thing we should discuss is the various aircraft requirements for safe mountain flying. Mountain flying requires a higher flight at altitude, which is thus requiring higher performing aircraft. The FAA recommends a minimum of 160 horsepower for the first time mountain flyer. While more experienced pilots who are extremely familiar with the land may be able to fly through the mountains with less power, the minimum of 160 horsepower ensures relatively fair performance capabilities in the event that you would need to use a higher power to climb, turn, or maneuver out of a potentially hazardous situation. Additionally, it is recommended that your plane have a minimum of 60 horsepower per occupant in the aircraft for those same reasons that I just said earlier. Also, keep in mind that non-turbocharged aircraft typically have ceilings of about 11,000 feet to 13,000 feet. This means that in many flying mountain locations, you will be below the MSA or minimum safe altitudes for flying, as peaks around you will likely be higher than what your airplane could overfly. Additionally, the higher altitude leads to less air density. This means your climbs will be slower and your turns will be much wider. This leads us to many navigational considerations. So navigating through mountains can be a trying experience. In many mountainous regions, there are limited navigational tools such as VORs and radar. Additionally, what aids there are often have very limited ranges as their signals get masked by the terrain. Because of this, IFR flight in mountains is not a consideration and should not really be attempted. IFR flight should only be used when flying well above the mountains. And also, ILS landings, which means you're flying IFR using instrument landing system, should only be attempted really when you have good enough visibility to do that, to see the peaks. So nighttime makes it a little more difficult. IFR flight should only be used when flying well above the mountains, like I said, and this leads pilots to rely on visual flight rules and visual navigation, such as dead reckoning, to do their navigation. Careful preparation is a must, as you often do not have the time to be constantly looking at maps and back out of the airplane. This can lead to missed navigational aids and disorientation that can lead a pilot to follow the wrong valley, which narrows into a peak which cannot be overclimbed. That would be bad because then you would crash. Your only option then may be to use a U-turn to go back to familiar terrain. However, oftentimes these valleys can be less than a mile wide. And because of that, they require the pilot to, basically, if they're less than a mile wide, you have to do a really steep turn, which at a higher altitude where the air density and engine performance does not allow for a sharp turn will significantly cause you to decrease altitude, which is also bad. So because of this, it is pivotal to familiarize yourself with the terrain as much as possible prior to mountain flight. Look at your aeronautical charts, look at maps, look at Google Earth, look at anything to see where the mountains are, where the ranges are. Look at elevation maps, because you need to know what the elevations are of a ridge and things like that. Don't just assume that you can go through two peaks, because between those two peaks might be 13,000 feet, which you might not be able to overfly, and thus you will crash. So be careful with that. So help minimize the amount of chart reliance by really familiarizing yourself, and that will help you to allow to use it more for reference instead of as a reliance, those aeronautical charts. Also consider that the lack of radar capabilities often mean that there is less chance of the air controllers monitoring your position. Because of this, it is vital to time out waypoints and pass these to ATC. This allows for them to be able to send out rescuers if you fail to reach a waypoint or your final destination. If in flight you get delayed, be sure to update ATC of these changes. So just say you have updated ATC with a bunch of checkpoints that you're gonna go for, and you go down the wrong valley, you have to take a U-turn to get back on the path that you were hoping to get on. Make sure you let ATC know, hey, I'm going to be a little late reaching this checkpoint that I have told you I should be at this time. It'll make ATC happy, and it'll potentially prevent them sending out rescuers when you don't need rescuers or something like that. Also, quick side note, if you can see, I am at 8,500 feet, so I am starting to do my level off right now.
World Travel 7489er Heavy.
And we still have 153 nautical miles until we get to that Lamar VOR. Going back to mountain flying, another navigational consideration is that it is recommended to try to always maintain an altitude of 1,000 feet above the terrain, as well as any mountain passes. However, this consideration is dependent on the lower wind speeds. If winds are higher, you should try to cross mountain passes at 2,000 feet or higher. Along those lines, it is recommended to not even attempt mountain flying if the winds aloft forecast at mountaintops is higher than 25 knots. Also keep in mind that you want to remain clear of clouds, so if cloud levels are at the same height that you would want to cross a pass at, you should not fly. For instance, if you want to cross a mountain pass where the elevation of that mountain pass is 11,000 feet and clouds are 11,500, do not try to fly it, because you're only going to have a 500-foot clearance between the ground and the sky, or the clouds, excuse me. If you go into the clouds, then you're blind. You don't know if there's a peak in front of you or beside you or what, and you could ultimately crash into a mountain because you weren't being able to see. Lastly, visibility is key when mountain flying. It is recommended that you have at least 15 miles of visibility before attempting mountain flight. Also, you should never fly into clouds when mountain flying, especially as VFR rules restrict it, but because you can't see, you could run into a peak or something like that. Finally, IFR flight and night flight in mountainous regions is not recommended. Now, most of the plane, pilot, and navigational factors expressed to this point have only discussed considerations while in flight. Additional considerations come up during the other stages of flight, such as takeoff, climb, and landing. Remember that at high altitudes, this means there is less air density, also known as being in environments of higher pressure altitude or density altitude, which is the pressure altitude corrected for temperature. These environments affect engine performance negatively. Because of this, you will have less power and performance during critical stages of flight, such as takeoff and landing. Let's take takeoff for example. During takeoff at lower air density means your wings will produce less lift. Also, your propeller is technically an airfoil and it will perform less efficiently as well. This ultimately means excuse me. This ultimately means that your takeoff rollout distances will be longer. Your acceleration to rotation speed will be slower, and your climb out rates will be smaller. This also means that you have less power needed in the event of go-arounds when landing. Also, in the event of emergencies, there will be much less terrain available for emergency landings. Always be sure to look for escape routes and landing possibilities when mountain flying at any stage of flight. So whenever you're mountain flying, always be looking to say, if this engine were to die, where could I land? When you're taking off, immediately start looking around, because it might not be the best approach to try to turn all the way around and land back on that runway. Always look for roads or other avenues that you could attempt a crash landing on if your engine were to cut out or you were to have other serious issues when mountain flying. Alright, we're going to quick acknowledge this.
4.0 for Papa Hotel, Quebec 28. Beach Uniform Sierra Hotel, contact in. Kansas City
Quit
Center,
contacting
Hotel,
Kansas
Quebec
City.
28 with you. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28. Kansas City Center, Roger, altimeter 3007, Pacifica 3408. Contact Kansas City Center on 1.
Also, it looks like this turned to a 2 flag, which means we are now connected to the Pueblo VOR, which is way too far away. Also, not good. No, we didn't quite connect to Pueblo. Pueblo is 116.7. I apologize. I'm not keeping track of these things very well. 116.9 is the VOR that we're trying to connect to, but we disconnected from that one VOR that was 100 nautical miles out, 190. But we are still 146 nautical miles away from the Lamar VOR. Anyway, going back to our mountain flying discussion. So we've talked about some of the pilot considerations, some of the airplane considerations. What is going on with this weather? Why am I all of a sudden just climbing? Oh, that's frustrating. Anyway, as I was saying before, so rudely interrupted by the weather, we've talked about some of the factors that you need to know about your plane's performance, about some of the factors knowing about your pilot performance and how many hours you should have, and some considerations while taking off, landing, and during navigation. Well, weather factors create the largest and most dynamically changing set of considerations when mountain flying. First thing is to have knowledge of terms I mentioned earlier: pressure altitude and density altitude. These are not always the same as your true altitude. Pressure altitude is the indicated altitude when an altimeter is set to an agreed baseline pressure setting. However, humidity and temperature also affect your aircraft. Thus, your density altitude, which is your pressure altitude corrected for those factors. Your aircraft may be at a certain true altitude. However, the air pressure may make it act as if it were at a different altitude. Let us look at an extreme example, okay? Just say you need to fly over a mountain pass that is 12,000 feet high in true altitude. This means that if you took a very long ruler straight from the pass to sea level, it would read exactly 12,000 feet. Now to overfly that, your plane should be at 13,000 feet, which may be the edge of your plane's ceiling. In this Piper Archer 2, the plane that I am flying right now, its ceiling is about 13,500 feet. So we could overfly that pass, right? Well, yes, given the weather is perfect. The temperature is low, there is zero humidity, and the outside air pressure is 29.92. But what if those variables are not perfect? Just say the outside air temperature is very hot for that 12,000 foot mark, and say 80 degrees. Now that seems pretty unrealistic, and it probably is, but just say it was 80 degrees, and also that it was a very humid day, say 80% humidity at that temperature, or altitude. Lastly, the outside air pressure is low. Let's just say it was at 28.00. Could we still overfly that pass? Unfortunately, given all those extremely unfavorable factors, the density altitude would be 18,624 feet. At that elevation, that true elevation of 12,000 feet, our aircraft could not fly at that elevation, and we would be unable to fly over that pass. If we attempted, we would be unable to climb high enough and would crash into the mountains. Density altitude is very important to consider. Remember that higher temperatures and higher humidity means less dense air. Typically, your engine will lose 3% of its power per 1,000 feet of density altitude. Thus, your density altitude must be considered before mountain flight. So just remember that basically what that is saying right there is, given very humid and hot weather, even though my aircraft ceiling is 13,500 feet, if it's extremely hot, extremely humid with low pressure, the density altitude at that 13,000 feet is going to be much higher, meaning the air is a lot less dense, meaning my aircraft could not actually reach its ceiling. So keep that in mind. Another thing is winds also pose a significant consideration for mountain flight. As mentioned earlier, when winds are higher than 25 knots, mountain flight should be avoided. This is because mountains affect what happens with the wind. First, we can look at the mountain pass that we would consider going through. Tunneling fluids into narrower areas means that those fluids flow faster. For example, if you are using a hose to water the grass, you would often place your thumb over the hole of that hose. This causes the water to spray out at much faster and further than when your thumb is not covering that hose. This is because as you close that hose, you're funneling the water that's coming out into a narrow area, making it shoot out faster and further. Since air is a fluid, when it gets tunneled through a mountain pass, it too will move faster. Thus, winds in a mountain pass are typically faster than the overall wind. I'm climbing way too high. Winds going perpendicular to mountain ridges also pose problems in the form of mountain waves. Much like water in a stream going up and over a rock and forming waves, air does the same thing. This means that prior to a ridge, there may be significant updrafts, and then past that ridge, there may be significant downdrafts. This is called a mountain wave. Some last wind effects to note is that of a microburst and wind shears. These sudden and violently strong gusts of wind have claimed many aircraft in mountain flight. So those are just some of the few effects of wind with mountains. Mountains not only affect wind, but cloud formation and precipitation as well. One key effect of mountains is that of orographic lifting. In a mountainous area, as wind blows, much moisture will be blown upslope. As it gets higher and ultimately colder, it will cool and form clouds. Often this moisture can be seen as a cap cloud forming on mountain peaks. However, this is in calmer winds and calmer weather, which are more often seen in winter. So that is why when you look at mountains on a calm day or in the winter, you often see clouds at those peaks, and this is because of orographic lifting. In the summer, the air tends to be less stable though. There tends to be higher winds, and instead of orographic lifting forming nice cap clouds, which affect visibility only, it starts convection. Convection is bad because this leads to the formation of thunderstorms, which obviously can affect aircraft in more ways than just visibility, but lightning and high winds and rain and precipitation. We've now learned of many of the factors that should be considered when accomplishing mountain flight. Some final things to consider come with emergency planning. You should always prepare for the worst, yet try to avoid issues to the best extent possible. For example, if weather, darn aircraft doing silly things again. What is going on there? Anyway, hang on. Gotta get this plane back on track because suddenly it just changes heading by like 20 degrees. It's ridiculous. Anyway, for example, if weather begins to deteriorate, never assume that it will get better during your mountain flight. It is always best to turn around and attempt the flight later than to crash. Same with getting lost or off track. If you get off your planned flight path, it is far better to turn around and get back to your path than continue only to fly or only to discover an impassable mountain pass ahead. Because you might get into a situation, like I said, with those narrower valleys where you can't turn around and ultimately you're just forced to funnel into a mountain and crash. So it is always best to turn around and get back on a path that you know will work. In the event of pilot error or airplane malfunction leading to a crash landing, always make sure you have a survival kit in your plane, including winter clothing, food, water, and first aid. If you crash land in Oklahoma right now, we would be at about 2,000 feet elevation, not very cold, it's nice and warm in the summer, it's not that big of a deal, and it's a lot more populated of an area. Well, if you were to crash land, say, in the mountains of Colorado at an altitude of 10,000 feet, nighttime is going to get bitterly cold, below freezing oftentimes. And so if you don't have winter gear, even if the day temperature was 60 degrees, at night it could get well below freezing. So even if you don't have winter gear, or even if you do have winter gear, it'll still get cold. Also remember that you're going to need water and food, usually up to at least 3 days, to prepare yourself for rescuers. Another thing is first aid, because you don't want to be stuck in a situation where one of your passengers is injured and you can't tend to their injuries because you don't have a first aid kit. Anyway, with all of that said, I hope you enjoyed learning some of the things about mountain flight. Remember, I've only scratched the surface of the in-depth factors and other considerations of mountain flight. The factors discussed could be expounded upon with much further detail, as well as learning about many other considerations. While in FSX, we can reset a flight, but in real life you cannot. So if you were to ever fly or try to attempt to fly mountain flight in real life, please get the proper training ahead of time, because you don't want to crash into a mountain and have to deal with that kind of situation. Anyway, that is a little ditty about mountain flight. I know I kind of went on a lot of information there, and some of it is tough to explain without visual aids and things like that. If you do have questions on any of the things I just discussed, please send me a message or a comment or whatever, because I will try to expound upon anything further for you. However, that is some of the basics with mountainous flight and some of the considerations that you should look at when attempting mountain flight. So I wanted to say that stuff because we are going into the mountains coming up, and I wanted you guys to understand what I was looking for when I'm doing mountain flight and what I am trying to consider and what real life situations may occur when mountain flying, because it is very different than flying over flatlands like we are doing right now. Anyway, with that said, we are still cruising at 8,500 feet, and we are still going to our VOR, the Lamar VOR, which is now 125 nautical miles away. And once we get to that Lamar VOR, we'll be able to turn into Pueblo. One thing I am going to note is that we are going to fly directly to this Lamar VOR and then turn to Pueblo. If I connect to Pueblo ahead of time, I am not going to try to shorten that up. That is because there is some MOAs around Pueblo. Pueblo actually is where initial flight school is for Air Force pilots. So there is a lot of Air Force pilot training going on there. And that means there is a lot of MOAs and there is a lot of traffic oftentimes with student pilots. So because of that, I am going to that Lamar VOR. What I am going to do is I'm going to pause the video now. However, I will bring you back in a little while when we get a little closer to the Lamar VOR, and I will discuss my flight planning that I have done for this flight. So you can see the MOAs ahead and see why I picked the VORs that I did pick, and we'll discuss some of that flight planning. So I will bring you all back in just a little bit. Alright, I'm bringing you back. We have experienced some turbulence. I've turned on the seatbelt sign, and you can see that everybody is getting pretty scared. But look at this turbulence. This is actually pretty severe turbulence. That's a lot of bouncing around. You can see that we gained about, 300 or 400 feet of altitude in a very quick amount of time. Some of the bad shaking, that is part of turbulence. So we did experience that. That was not fun. However, it seems to be that we are kind of out of it right now. Hopefully we don't deal with it. I only had the video paused for about 1 minute before that occurred. That would have easily occurred during my mountain speech had I taken an extra minute to do that. But it appears to be out of the turbulence for right now. But man, I was surprised. That was some of the harder turbulence I've experienced in this game. Trying to get back to the altitude that I was at, which is 8,500 feet. Another thing I am noticing is that we're at about 55% fuel, so that is going to be a consideration as we get closer to Pueblo, because this is pushing the flight limits of this aircraft. I was thinking that we'd have a quarter tank, but I think we might be less than that. So that is going to be something that we're going to have to keep our eye on as we get further towards Pueblo. Anyway, we are almost back to 8,500 feet, so what I'm going to do for real this time is pause the video, keep flying a little bit, since there still is not really anything to look at. And I will bring you back when we get a little closer to that Lamar VOR. Alright everybody, welcome back. We have continued to fly, and if you can look over here, we are 43 nautical miles away from that Lamar VOR. Additionally, we have connected to the Pueblo VOR. So if I switch to my nav1, we are now 121 nautical miles away from Pueblo, Colorado. I did connect to that earlier. We connected to it at about 195 nautical miles out, but I was waiting until now to bring you guys back. If we look down here, we can see that our plane is right here. We're about to enter into Colorado. KLAA, I believe, is that Lamar airport and where that Lamar VOR is. Also, you can start to see some more MOAs coming up. These MOAs are for Pueblo and the Colorado area because there are a lot of Air Force installations there. And like I said, Pueblo has that Air Force initial flight school. And we got to contact someone. Acknowledge handoff.
133.4 Papa Hotel, Quebec 28.
133.4. Now we're going to be contacting Denver City, our center, for the first time. We've been in contact with Kansas City the whole time, not Fort Worth.
Denver Center, Roger. Altimeter 3003.
3003, which we're pretty much on right now, so that actually dropped us a little below. And what I was going to do at this time is I was going to discuss our flight planning that we have done for this flight. So I'm going to bring over my Firefox window and keep it fairly small so we can kind of maintain a view of what is happening outside. Anyway, if I come all the way down here, right here is Norman, Oklahoma, and the University of Oklahoma Westheimer Airport, which we took off from on that runway 35, the one that went straight north, pretty much. So if I were to zoom in, you can kind of see that runway 35 right there. Anyway, we took off from there, and we basically headed straight north, avoiding the Will Rogers Airport, which is right here, transitioning through this Class C airspace, and then eventually we passed Oklahoma City and then started heading west. Right here you can see that Gage VOR, which was that first VOR that we were going to try to connect to. However, here is that MOA that I missed seeing because I was looking at it so zoomed in, I just did not realize that it was there. Anyway, that was a bad mistake on my part. Luckily, I did not fly into it, even though I technically, again, could have because I was flying VFR flight rules. Anyway, we came from Oklahoma City over to this Gage VOR, and we were able to bypass it for the most part because we were able to connect to this Liberal VOR, which is right here. So you can see it's pretty much a straight northwest angle. Also, you can see that coming from the Will Rogers VOR, which we were connected to, if we flew at a heading of 29 or 2 degrees, we'd follow this blue line, which would take us directly to this Gage VOR. Then we hopped onto this 29er radial, where if we came following it, it takes us to this Liberal VOR. Then from Liberal, what we did is we're flying basically a 300 heading, which you can see is following along this flight path right there. Here's those MOAs that I was talking about, the two Buttes MOA, and I'm turning a little bit. And here is that Lamar Airport and Lamar VOR. And you can see how it's kind of strategically placed because there is a MOA here, there is a MOA down here, and it's placed so however you're coming to it, you can kind of avoid flying into the MOAs by going straight to this VOR, either from this one or from the one over here or the one down here. Any of these, you can basically fly into this VOR without crossing into some of these MOAs. Then once we get to the Lamar VOR, which is the one that we are about 40 miles away from, we will head straight over. And here's that Pueblo VOR in Pueblo, Colorado, and the airport that we're going to be landing at. Now, there are some considerations with this. This VOR is right on the city. And the reason, again, why I did not go directly to it from the Liberal one is I would go right through all of these two Buttes MOAs. So to deconflict with those MOAs, I'm going up to this Lamar VOR and then straight over. That way I go through or go around this MOA, I go under this MOA, and I'm avoiding all the MOAs that are around here because you can see there are quite a bit. Another thing you'll notice is that the minimum safe altitudes and elevations for this area are now at about 5,300 feet, 4,600 feet, and they've slowly been increasing as we've been heading west. If I go back to our plane and we look out our window, you can see that it looks like we're only flying at about 4,000, 5,000 feet, but actually we're at 8,500 feet. But what's happening is the elevation of the ground has raised so much that our perspective changes some. So even though we're at 8,500 feet, we're actually only about 4,000 feet above ground level. So when we're flying back, you know, when we're in Minnesota or even in Texas or something like that, where we're flying at 5,000 feet, it looked about this close still. That is just because the ground elevation is continuing to rise the more and more we have headed to the west. So that is another reason we wanted to be at 8,500, because if I would have chose to fly at 4,500, I would just be skimming the surface of the ground, if not crashing into it by this point. I could have maybe made it by going at 6,500. However, if I bring up Sky Vector again, you can see that there are some areas around here where the elevation gets relatively high, 5,800. So I'd actually only be 7,000 feet or 700 feet above the ground level at that point. So to maintain being at a good safe flying altitude, especially considering too, if the ground is at 5,000 feet right here, there might be towers that go up 1,000 feet or two. And if I'm flying at 6,000 feet, I still possibly run the chance of crashing into one of those. So to maintain all deconfliction with ground devices and altitude or elevation concerns with the ground, that is why I'm flying at 8,500 feet. So now here's that Lamar VOR again. That is what we're trying to get to. We are only 30 miles away from it, and then we will be able to turn left and head into Pueblo. Going back to my GPS, you can see that there is that Two Bears MOA. Here is Lamar. I kind of turned off course a little again. But once we connect to that, we'll be able to head basically straight west and connect to Pueblo, which will eventually then take us, well, to the airport in Pueblo where we're trying to land. Also, you can see that as we're getting closer, this is starting to deflect quicker. Now I basically have to head at a heading of 300 just because I started to deviate a little more to the west than the northwest while I was explaining my flight path that I was taking. So that is the flight path that I have chosen to take. That is why I went to 8,500 feet. Those are the VORs that we were planning on flying. It was pretty standard flight planning. However, there are more MOAs and considerations like that to be aware of. Also, a few other things that you might not see are all these MOAs, but then also you can see like this red dotted line right here. For reasons of national security, pilots are requested to avoid flight at and below 3,000 feet AGL in this area. So they want you to be more than 3,000 feet above ground level, or AGL, in this area. I'm not sure exactly what's there. It might be Air Force Academy or something like that, because again, there is a lot of pilot training that takes place for the Air Force in Pueblo, so that might be what that is. Also, you can see all these different cautions. Intensive U.S. Air Force student training within 28 DME, or distance measuring equipment, of PUB, which is Pueblo Airport, 8,000 feet and below. So again, by being at 8,500, we will be above that. So another good reason to be at 8,500 feet. So now you can kind of see a lot of the good reasons why I did my flight planning ahead of time. That is why you need to flight plan ahead of time. So you can mitigate flying into MOAs. You can mitigate going into areas where you're not supposed to, because it is technically your responsibility. It is not the responsibility of the ATC controller to say, hey, don't fly there. It is your responsibility to not fly there. So that is our flight planning for this flight. We are getting closer finally. As you can see, we have been in the air for quite a while. We've changed the time zone also as well, coming this way. We should be now in mountain time as opposed to central time. But anyway, that's all other things that we can worry about later. Regardless, we are 26 nautical miles away from the Lamar VOR. Then we will turn to Pueblo. Getting closer. I'm very excited because this has been a long flight, and I have not used time acceleration or anything like that. I have truly been sitting here flying this the entire time. Another thing to note is my fuel level is at about 37%, so it is going to be pretty close. So another thing to keep an eye on. I'm not worried about it. We should definitely have enough fuel. I'm assuming we'll probably have about 15% fuel by the time we get to Pueblo. So I would not be able to go much farther than Pueblo, but whatever. We will get there. So let's keep continuing flying. We're at 8,500 feet still, almost to that Lamar VOR. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the video again. I'll maybe bring you back when we're at Lamar and on our way to Pueblo, and then I'll cut it again and probably have you come in for the final approach and landing at Pueblo, Colorado, Pueblo Memorial Airport. So I will see you guys all in a little bit. Cars all of a sudden are driving through the building. What is going on? Well, that's not logical at all. Why are cars driving through the building? What is going on here? No, cars can't drive through buildings. That is silly. Alright everybody, we are back. We are right over that Lamar VOR, I should say just south of it. You can see that if I turn my Omni bearing selector knob to the from flag, we are pretty much just straight south of it at a heading of about 190 roughly at 78.8 nautical miles. So if I were to bring over Sky Vector, right here is that VOR. Down here would be about where we are, about 7 miles away, since this ring is at about at 10 miles, so we'd be about right here. And then you can see off the nose this John Martin Reservoir, which is coming up. This is going to be a kind of a big lake. I believe it is also a national forest area, the John Martin Reservoir National Forest and Reservoir, and I believe it's on the Arizona River, but I could be wrong on that. I am not 100% sure, actually. The Arkansas River. So that is what it is on. John Martin Reservoir, John Martin Reservoir State Park is what it is. Not a state forest, but it's a state park. Regardless, it is going to be another scenic location. Otherwise, if you look out in the distance, we can kind of see the first set of mountain peaks that we are going to be running into. They're a little south of us. We're not going to be flying into those, but we are going to be seeing more peaks coming up as we get closer to Pueblo. So what I have done is I have Pueblo as my main VOR indicator right now, and we can see that we basically just have to fly straight west. Coming down to my GPS, you can see that if I fly straight west, I should be deconflicted now with this MOA, and if I zoom out one, you're going to see that Pueblo is about right there. That is Pueblo right there. This is Denver, and you can see the Class B airspace rings around it, Class C airspace rings around Colorado Springs, and then right here is Pueblo, and that is where we are heading. So we should be deconflicted with these MOAs now, be able to fly mostly straight in, and we have a nice view of that John Martin Reservoir Lake, which is, again, a reservoir lake from the Arkansas River. So it's kind of a fun thing to look at. Anyway, with that said, we are a total of 75 nautical miles away from Pueblo, Colorado. We are almost there. I am very excited to get there, and I want to get there because we are running low on fuel. We're at 30% fuel now, so we got to get there relatively soon. Anyway, I am probably going to cut the video one last time and bring you back when we are on our final approach into Pueblo, Colorado.
Airwave Niner.
Alright guys, we are back and we are now in contact with Pueblo approach. As you can see, the mountains that were off in the distance are getting much closer as we are nearing the Rockies. You can see another big one right up there, and if you look off the nose, maybe if I lift my head up a little bit, Pueblo is right over here. We are in contact with them, and if you look, we are 15 nautical miles away from Pueblo VOR, which is just east of the airport. So what I am going to do is I am going to turn to the north a little more. I was heading a little bit south. As you can see, I've deviated a little bit south, and that is simply to avoid this area right here, which I am not supposed to fly into. So I kind of came down a little down here, and I'm probably around here, and then I can come up into Pueblo with avoiding that area. Also, what I am going to do is I'm going to pull back my throttle, because we are going to go into our initial approach and descent, and then I'm going to cancel my flight following with Pueblo approach and contact their tower. If I can.
Pueblo approach, Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, cancel flight following. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, Pueblo approach, cancellation received, squawk 1200, frequency change approved.
1200, and now I'm going to go to the nearest airport list, and I'm going to go to Pueblo Memorial. And you can see I've already tuned these frequencies in, 119.1 and 121.9. The ATIS is one that I need to do, which is going to be 125.25. Oh, stop that.
Pueblo Airport Information Uniform 1515 Zulu, wind 152 at 7, visibility greater than 20 miles, sky condition clear, temperature 2 at 7, dew point 9, altimeter 3015, ILS runway 8 left and visual, runway 8 right in use, landing and departing, runway 8 left and runway 8 right. VFR aircraft stay direction of flight, all aircraft read back hold short instructions. Vice controller on initial contact, you have uniform. Pueblo Airport Information Uniform.
Alright, so we have our ATIS information, so now I'm going to go to COM 1, and you can see that I've contacted Pueblo Tower, which is the frequency 119.1, and according to the ATIS information, they're using runway 8, so if I pull over my airport diagram, you can see that they're using runway 8 left and runway 8 right. So we're going to come in through the south side and then fly in. So what I'm going to do is, now that I know where we're going to go, I'm going to contact them. They'll give me specifically whether I'm going to be going into 8 left or 8 right.
Pueblo Tower, Papa Hotel, Quebec 28 is 14 miles east with Victor to land. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, Pueblo Tower, flight right traffic, runway 8 right, altimeter 3015.
Left traffic, runway 8 right.
Make right downwind, runway 8 right, Papa Hotel, Quebec 28.
Right downwind. So again, since we're going to make right downwind, runway 8 right is right here. It's the big one. So I'm going to be coming in, I'm coming in pretty much straight east. And what I'm going to do is enter at about a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to come perpendicular. And then once I get about a mile and a half out, I'll start turning at a 45-degree angle and enter it at a 45-degree angle. Start heading south on right traffic, which means I'm going to be taking right turns. So I'll come in like this, turn into the pattern right, then the base, and then up in final. That is my intentions for landing. Kind of see the airport right out there. .2 nautical miles away from the VOR, and then the VOR again is slightly to to the east of the airport. We're still coming in pretty fast, but I want to get closer, but we are in our descent. The airport elevation for that runway is 4,670 feet, so I do need to descend to about 5,700 feet roughly. So I have about another close to 600 feet in our descent to go. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to speed myself up a little, but I'm going to do so where it's actually going to give me a faster airspeed, but also keep the descent, so we're going to get going a little faster, but I want to get closer to that airport. I am only at 19% fuel. I try not to get below 15 because I like to have good reserves, but we'll be alright. We will be alright. Airport directions should be right in front of us, but I'm going to request just to make sure that it is it.
Papa Hotel, Quebec 28 is unfamiliar with the area. Request directions to the airport. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28. Airport is 11 o'clock, 9 miles.
11 o'clock, 9 miles. So it is 11 o'clock, which is right there. We're heading 12 would be there, so it is 11 o'clock, and that's only 9 miles away. Starting to get a little lower. It's kind of an interesting feeling being at 6,000 feet and seeing the ground about 1,500 feet below you. It's something you're not used to in many cases. I'm going to start to slow down some now that I am getting a little lower as well. I keep on zooming in because I want to keep seeing if I can see the runways. I believe this right here is runway 35. Oh no. Oh no. And I believe I have been looking at this wrong the whole time. I have. Shoot. I have to rotate it. Alright, so let's zoom out a second. Sorry about this.
H352, exit runway when able.
Alright, so I have figured it out. I am actually coming in at a 2-6 heading. I should have noticed this when they gave me the directions, but I had to rotate my airport diagram, so I'm actually coming in here. So I got to come down to the south some to enter at a 45-degree angle, turn onto base, and then final on runway 8 right, using right-handed turns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn to the south of this airport a little more. Juvenile mistake. The one thing I don't like about the digital ones is sometimes they don't show up always with the north at top, and you really have to think about it for a second. Alright, we are going way too fast now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull back my throttle, start to bleed off some of the speed. You can see the runway is right here. Trying to bleed off some of the speed. I'm going to put in not my first extended flaps. I did want to bleed off some of the speed. I don't know why this weather keeps on going crazy on me all the time. So you can see I'm turning now. I should have had my seatbelt sign on this whole time as well.
Please fasten your seatbelt.
I'm not paying enough attention. Oh, this is not good. I hate when I screw up like that. But I'm only human. I can make mistakes. Alright, so we're entering at a 45-degree angle. And this airport diagram is showing that there should be another runway up here, which I am not seeing. So, I don't know where they're getting this runway 3 left, or 8 left and right. Also, I'm getting way too low, so I need to increase my power some. And we're going to turn straight to the west. Start to level out. And you can see that we're almost perpendicular with that runway. We're a little tight too, so I'm not happy about that. So we'll try to slowly go more than just west so we can get out from it a little more.
Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, cleared to land, runway 8, right.
Cleared to land, runway 8 right.
Cleared to land, runway 8, right. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28.
Oh, and there I see it. It is that small one right there. So it is actually a bigger one on this aeronautical chart. Everything is backwards. Or not on this aeronautical chart, but on this, if you look on my airport diagram, 8 right is actually the big one. But in the game, it's showing that 8 left is the really big one, and 8 right is the small one. So things are a little different here. Alright, so I'm going to start turning into base. I'm not sure why my aircraft is bouncing around so much. This is really frustrating. Kind of a sharp turn, but I knew we were in really tight to that runway. Also, I'm going to put in my first detent of flaps too to start to bleed off some speed. I should have done that earlier, but that is alright. Bleed off a lot more speed than we are. What may have happened is they may have built a new runway 8 left and made this one even bigger. I'm not sure if that's the case, and made this into the new runway 8 right and made this into a taxiway. That is very possible that they just built another runway. But it is kind of confusing that the small one is the one closer to the terminal here. The downside to having the game be 10 years old is a lot of the airport diagrams and things like that don't always match up. And I don't know if you can see what's happening with my aircraft, but it is really kind of doing some weird bouncing around. And we are on final. Also, there is no VASI lights that I am seeing, which makes this a little more difficult as well. I think I'm getting a little low right here. Man, this aircraft keeps on turning. Oh no! Oh no! Alright. Go around.
Going around, Papa Hotel, Quebec 28. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, copy, go around.
So that is sometimes what you need to do, but this plane was not doing what it... I don't know if you saw the nose. I'm not sure if that's the weather engine doing things that are goofy or what, but it should not be doing that. Also, you can see I've gave full throttle. I'm going to put up my flaps, but we need to get more power and start climbing. I was not happy with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video once we get into the downwind portion. This is left turns. Whoa, I don't need to do that. Stop, stop. Something is wrong with my weather engine. So what I'm going to do is anyway, I'm going to get into... I'm going to pause it once I'm in the downwind, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off my weather engine because something was making my aircraft do really weird things like you just saw right there and how it keeps on shifting back and forth. That definitely should not be happening. It's making landing very impossible. So I am going to quick enter this downwind and turn off my weather engine, because something is definitely wrong. Alright, so we are in the downwind. Yeah, something's wrong because my aircraft keeps on bouncing like that, so I'm going to quick pause this video. Alright everybody, I turned off my weather engine and I have made it so it is just clear skies outside. Barometric pressure should be at 2.9 or 2, and as you can see, it is kind of smoothed out what was happening with my aircraft, how it was just kept on bouncing left and right. Made it impossible to actually line up with the runway. So yeah, I don't know what was going on there. Something with my weather engine was screwing me up though, so I just turned it off. But sometimes if you're in bad weather, if you have weird crosswind gusts or something like that, it is okay to do a go-around. So don't think that you don't need to do one of those. It's always better to be safer than sorry in an aircraft, so keep that in mind. We are turning on to final approach right now. Or on to base right now, but then we're going to turn into final. Gonna pull back my throttle even more. We're about 1,000 feet up. Because I'm in a little tighter, so I'm gonna want to descend some more too. So I'm gonna put on my second detent of flaps as well. And I gotta watch that airspeed. As you can see, I was getting pretty slow there, and I don't want to stall. That would be quite bad. Alright, we're looking a lot better this time without having all that bouncing around that was going on. I'm going to push up my throttle. I put in my third detent flaps, but I'm going to push up my throttle some so I can gain a little airspeed and now pull it back. And again, I wish I had some Vassier Pappy lights, some kind of indicators for this approach, because this is a narrow runway. Be so much nicer to land on 8 left, but I suppose they're going to use that for bigger aircraft. That's all right. We can make this work. Coming in at a good speed now. Off a little to the right, but we'll start to straighten up. There we go. Pull back my throttle a little more. And a little more. A little harder than I wanted to, but nice and center, so I am happy with that. So I don't know where you're supposed to go off, but I'm just going to come off.
Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, contact ground on 121.9er.
121.9er, so we'll acknowledge that and we'll come over. And we're going to taxi to the gates.
Ground, Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, taxi to the Papa Hotel, Quebec 28, taxi to gate Papa 1 using taxiway. Pueblo ground, airwave 9er 229er.
Okay, using taxiway what?
IFR, airwave 9er 229er, taxi 2 and hold short of runway 8 left via taxiway runway 8 right Bravo. Contact tower on 119er.1 when ready. Taxiing to
Finally.
Papa 1 using taxiway. Papa Hotel, Quebec 28.
Using what taxiway?
Taxiing hold short runway 8
Something
left
is definitely
via
wrong
taxiway
here, so I'm
runway
using
8
progressive
right Bravo.
taxi because this does not make any sense. They're not giving me a taxiway, it's just using the taxiway. I don't know. It says it's a taxiway alpha here. What I'm thinking happened, like I said, I think what this is they built a new runway, a new 8 left, which is smaller, and the current taxiway alpha, according to my airport diagram, is the old taxi, or runway 8 right. That is what I believe happened. I'll have to do some research on that to make sure. Anyway, we have made it to our parking spot. I am parking. Whew. Put on the parking brake. We are here. So parking brake is on. Awesome. I am going to open the door, let these passengers out, and I'm going to go through my shutdown checklist. So flaps, we're going to put those all the way up. Electronic fuel pump is already off. Landing light, we are going to turn that off. Strobes, we're going to keep the, well, I never turned them on, so we're going to turn those to off. Transponder is going to come off into the off position. Trim, we're going to set that for takeoff, which should be around 7. All passengers are off the plane, which is awesome, so we just got to finish doing this. 6.6 should be good. Parking brake is set. Avionics are coming off. Magnetos, we are not going to check them, but mixture is coming to the off or cutoff position, and we can see our engine died. Ignition switch is coming to the off position right there. Hobbs tachometer, we could record. Chocks, we're not going to be doing that. Batteries are coming off. Also, my nav light is coming off, and my pitot heat is coming off. So everything should be off right there. I didn't have that overhead light on or anything like that, so we should be good to go. So what I'm going to do is go into FSPassengers and end my flight. Flight is registered. It was a nice landing. It was a KISS 126, or 126.9 feet per minute coming down. So I'm fine with that as my touchdown. Wow, you can see that we departed at 6:30 and made it at 9:30. That was a 3-hour flight. That was a long flight. And my total sim income was only $2,100. I think I paid more on the shorter flight. So that doesn't make any sense to me, but whatever. We are here. We're going to be doing some fun flights when we're here. Reputation should be 90. It decreased some because of turbulence. Also, the strobe lights must be activated. I knew about that. I made a very smooth landing and landed at my scheduled airport. So, we are here. I am happy. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Flight is ended. Thank you all for watching. If you have any questions or suggestions or comments, please send me a message or a comment or say hi. Do whatever, because I love hearing from you guys. Also, if you have not subscribed, please click down in this bottom corner where the subscribe button is, because every time I see that subscribe number go up, it makes me a lot happier. So, thanks again for watching. We are in Pueblo, Colorado. I will see you guys next time.